Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cybercrime. I am Kevin Jennings, and today we're talking about pornography and prostitution. So, pornography is something that's been around since, as far as we can tell, the beginning of humanity. We have ancient art from, Pompeii and ancient Greek pottery and, from all over the world, and basically every culture where we have records from prehistory, we find some kind of pornography written on walls, written on, um, you know, materials, objects. So it's something that's kind of universal to humanity. It really exploded with the invention of the camera in the 19th century. And a lot of the early photography was nude models, which, kind of bridge that line between art and pornography, which is a theme that runs throughout basically the entire history of pornography. What's art and what's porn? Um, in the early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century, one of the most common forms of pornography was postcards, because different countries would sell pictures of nude women and men in postcard form, and then you could either transport them or send them around the world, and it became an easy to collect, easy to transport, easy to kind of justify kind of pornography. Then in the early 20th century, we got the invention of video. And the first movies, even the old school silent movies, many of those early ones were essentially pornography. There was a lot of, silent film recreations of Greek myths with nude models. One of the biggest, most popular form of early silent film was men working out naked. So there was the kind of excuse that this was a movie about fitness, when in reality it was essentially gay porn, right? In the 50s, there became a magazine that became increasingly popular called Playboy. And Playboy, prior to Playboy, there had been kind of pornographic magazines for sale, but they were very much looked down on, seen as trashy, seen as lower class. But with Playboy, since they interspersed nude images with things like political discourse and articles by, famous thinkers of the day, it got a better social acceptance, right? It was okay to have Playboys to a level that it wasn't okay to have, these other pornographic magazines that were popular, or at least semi-popular at the time. Now, homemade pornography was still a relatively rare occurrence because, while you could purchase a camera yourself, you had to send it off to a professional to get the film developed. And not a lot of people were willing to send off, homemade pornography to some unknown third party to get processed until the invention of the Polaroid camera. And with Polaroid cameras, you didn't need to send film off to be developed by other people. So it saw an increasing incidence of, people taking nude pictures of themselves or their loved ones. Because that film didn't have to be processed by someone else, it became a common way for people to create pornography. Then there was one of the biggest inventions in pornographic history was the VCR. So if you wanted to watch a nude movie prior to the VCR, you had to go to a public theater to watch pornography, where there were usually or almost always other people there in the room watching with you, which is a little socially uncomfortable. So, but with the VCR, you could purchase pornographic films and watch them in the privacy of your own home. So one of the big reasons that VCRs became so popular so fast was the field of pornography, and the fact that people could be in private when they were viewing pornography. But then, of course, came the internet. And with the internet, pornography exploded into levels not seen before in the Western world. It made accessing and viewing pornography of all kinds incredibly easy, incredibly popular. It cost essentially nothing because, while there is pornography on the internet that must be purchased, there is a heck of a lot of it that is just free for the taking. And so at one point, Carnegie Mellon estimated that 80% of all the images on the internet are pornographic. And whether that's true or not, I'm not so sure. That sounds like the kind of statistic that, somebody had a vested interest in making that number as large as possible. But at the same time, I wouldn't be that surprised if that was accurate. The internet is definitely hugely widely used for the sharing of pornographic materials. Now, a few different kind of sub aspects of pornography on the internet that you need to be aware of. The first is the increasing prevalence of sexting, right? Thanks to the inventions of cell phones, and then the additions of cameras to cell phones, we now have a very wide practice of sexting, which is just texting with sex, right? So this could be anything from, saying dirty things to each other using text, or even more commonly, using the cell phone's camera to take a naked picture and then sending that to other people, which, as long as everybody's a consenting adult, isn't that big a deal. The problem comes in either when the people doing this sexting are under the age of 18 in the United States. The age limit is different in other countries. Or when those pictures are meant for one person, but they get spread around to many other people. And those two things, people underage or, a privately given pornographic image from one person to another becoming much more widely available to the public, have made sexting a very large issue in the field of law enforcement. It's so incredibly easy to take photos and to send photos and to then further transfer photos with modern cell phones, modern computers, and all the modern messaging programs, that this has become a huge realm that law enforcement has to be worried about. Another issue is fetishes. And fetishes are just specific, some might say non-traditional things that are combined with sexuality to become they can reach the level of criminal, right? So many fetishes like feet and balloons and food, while many of us might think they're strange, aren't illegal. But fetishes can migrate into the realm of illegality. And this is especially dependent, again, on local law. But many of the common fetishes that are illegal in many of the many countries around the world are things like animals, underage boys and girls, violence. So there are lots of these different fetishes that are perfectly legal in the vast majority of jurisdictions, but there are fetishes that are not legal, let's just say, in most jurisdictions. Now, Rule 34 is something you should know about. There was a famous website called 4chan, and if you've never heard of 4chan, please don't go to 4chan. 4chan is the kind of proverbial wretched hive of scum and villainy from Star Wars. But at one point, the members of 4chan created the rules for the internet. And rule number 34 was there is porn of it, no exceptions. So if you can think of a subject, a topic, fictional characters, anything you can think of, there is some form of pornography centering on that thing on the internet somewhere. So again, please don't go looking for this, but there is pornography based around essentially every single topic that you could possibly think of out there on the internet. And if there's not, there will be soon. One of the most famous criminal cases when it comes to the internet and pornography was a situation that came to be called the fappening. And this was a few years ago now. I want to say it was late 20-teens when the online cloud accounts for numerous famous actresses were hacked, and their nude photos were essentially, there was a blackmail attempt, but that wasn't successful, so their nude photos that they had taken for their own private use were released publicly on the internet. So these young famous actresses now had naked photos of them that they had taken for private reasons and had intended to keep private, published to where anybody with an internet connection can go see them. And by many of the seedier parts of the internet, this day was celebrated. Obviously, it was a criminal act and had, I don't know any of these actresses personally, but I would assume that they had a very negative impact on these young women. But it was a very famous crime. And I'm not sure if they ever figured out who the offender in that case was, but I hope they did, and I hope that person faced a lot of punishment. But it seems like the next big technological advance when it comes to pornography is going to be virtual reality. So just in the last few years, there have been many economically successful virtual reality at-home kits to be used. You know, there's the Quest and the Oculus and the few other ones. And I've only gotten a chance to use one of these once at my father's house, and it was really cool. So if you haven't tried virtual reality, you definitely should try it. It's a really interesting, very fun kind of media. But apparently there is a lot of pornography being created specifically for virtual reality, which allows you to kind of become a little bit more a part of the action, so to speak. And that is seeming to be the next major technological step in pornographic consumption. Now, when we're talking about pornography, you know, whether it's on the internet or not on the internet, one of the topics we have to discuss alongside it is the concept of a moral panic. And a moral panic, there's been many of these over the years about pornography, but a moral panic in general is when society seems to latch on to a certain subject, get terrified of that subject, think, oh my God, this thing is coming to destroy the children, and how could anybody allow this to happen? And oh my gosh, this is going to be the death of our country or the death of our culture or whatever. Like, oh my God, we're all freaking out about this thing. You know, one of the more famous moral panics was in the 1980s and 90s. There was a huge moral panic about the game Dungeons and Dragons and how this game was leading teenagers towards the devil, and it's gonna cause death and destruction and moral rot in all of the children of the nation, and oh my God, how can they allow Dungeons and Dragons? So moral panics are, you know, every year it seems, or every few years, there's a new moral panic out there about, oh my gosh, I can't believe they allow this thing, it's going to be the death of our... pornography is frequently the target of these moral panics. But again, as I said a few slides ago, pornography has been around as long as humans have created art of any kind. It's going to be around probably until humanity dies out, hopefully far, far in the future. So be aware of moral panics, whether it's around pornography or anything else, and try to put these giant fears into context the next time you see one. Now, another line we have to draw when it comes to pornography is deviant versus illegal. So when something is deviant, that means that kind of society looks down on it. They don't see it as the right thing to do. They see it as crass or wrong. but it's not against the law. You're not going to get arrested for doing it. Good example here, kind of a classic example, is cheating on your spouse, right? Most of us here in this culture look down on cheating on your spouse. We see that as a negative thing to do, but it's not illegal. You're not going to get arrested for it, right? So that's deviance. Illegal means there is a legal punishment for doing it, right? And we hope that there is a large overlap, a large conjunction between deviant and illegal. We want things that are illegal to be deviant. We want things that are deviant, usually, to be illegal. But it's not always the case. As previously pointed out, something like cheating on your spouse is deviant but not illegal. And then there are things that are increasingly seen as illegal but not deviant. In much of the country, much of the world, smoking marijuana is not really seen as deviant anymore, but it is still illegal. So when it comes to pornography, many people see all pornography as deviant. Other people see essentially no pornography as deviant. But when it comes to illegal, these are the ways that online sex, pornography mostly, but not necessarily, where online sex can become illegal in most jurisdictions. Here in the United States, most countries have similar laws, but essentially pornography or sex online is perfectly legal, whether you see it as deviant or not, unless it meets one of these categories. An underage actor, i.e. somebody starring in the picture or film or whatever, is under the age of 18 here in the United States. In other countries, they set that line differently. Some countries it's 16, some countries it's 19. When the viewer is underage, that is also commonly illegal. Again, here in the United States, you have to be 18 to view pornography. If the pornography involves animals, there are kind of classic thought experiments on what animals are fetishized. It's become kind of a part of popular culture with movies and TV shows referencing different animal on human sex acts. If the pornography depicts rape, and this is actual rape, not kind of simulated rape, revenge porn is illegal, and that was, as I implied earlier, revenge porn is when, one person sends pornography to a second person with the understanding that that would remain private, and then the second person, usually after a fight or falling out with the first person, decides to post that pornographic image or video or whatever online for general public consumption. This has become known as revenge porn and is now illegal in all 50 states and in most nations around the world. Prostitution is also illegal, whether you organize this online or whether you organize this in person. Any kind of prostitution in the United States, well, most parts of the United States, is illegal. And then, of course, there's sexual harassment. Sex online can frequently and easily migrate into the sexual harassment category, and that is illegal here in the United States and, again, in most countries. So, here in the United States, what is the kind of controlling legal standard for when something is pornography or not? Right? When is it illegal or not? So, the controlling Supreme Court case here is Miller v. California. And in Miller v. California, the Supreme Court said, essentially, the short version is, it is allowable to have laws against obscenity, either preventing it entirely or making it, keeping it out of certain parts of life, say public libraries. But you have to define obscenity in a both kind of simultaneously specific and non-specific way. So obscenity has to be defined as kind of by the average person in the contemporary adult community. And what the average person in the contemporary adult community feels is obscene versus not obscene changes over time, right? So what the average person sees as obscenity in 1973 is very different from what the average person sees as obscenity in the 2020s, and I'm assuming it will be very different from what the average person sees as obscenity in the 2080s. So this definition is kind of allows the changing of the times in that way, by allowing it to kind of be tied to what the kind of standard is in the local community, which is going to change over time, and thus the definition of obscenity, according to the Supreme Court, is going to change over time. And then importantly, it has to lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. So if it has serious value in any of those categories, it is, by definition, not obscene, according to the Supreme Court. So this is the current standard. This is the current kind of Supreme Court precedent that guides obscenity laws throughout the United States. In other countries, they have different standards, they have different laws. But because I'm in the United States, and because I'm assuming most of my viewers here and most of my students are in the United States, that is the standard that is kind of most impactful in this case. So we're going to take a little break. We'll be back with another section on prostitution in just a moment. Thank you for watching.